You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, Dapper Dinosaur here for the, what is this, Dapper Reacts 81, Evolution is Untestable. I am here currently solo. Welcome everybody. Star Song for $5 before we really get into it says, I want to do some microscopy on my channel. I have never uploaded anything to YouTube before. Time will be limited. Well, good luck with that. I hope that that works out. I hear that you recently got yourself a microscope and a camera, so that'll be pretty cool. I look forward to seeing some of that. So I hope everyone is doing well, and yes, there were some technical difficulties that made it so that this show was very, very lucky to get started even close to on time. Basically, over an hour ago, one of my windows hung, and I was like, I've got plenty of time, I'll just restart my computer, you know, and it wasn't like restarting when I hit end process, which is why I was bothering at all to restart, because I just didn't want it hanging out there for the rest of the time. Yeah, my computer didn't want to restart. It took like 5 attempts, including 2 attempts of just cutting power. And then finally it booted, and it came up just in time for me to start this, just barely on time. As a result, I currently have a dark and stormy, because, yeah, that's the kind of morning it's been, apparently. So, yeah, we are keeping track of the drinking rules. I'm not going to go over them, but if you do decide to play along, and you do decide to use anything intoxicating, please be careful. Don't operate heavy machinery, don't fly a plane, don't drive a car, don't text your ex. Just, you know, be careful. So, today we are taking a look at a video recording of, I guess, what goes up as a podcast from ICR. So this is from Creation.com, and this is their Creation Talks podcast, and this is called Why Darwinism is Not a Testable Scientific Theory. Now, eventually, we might get into why that title is incredibly stupid, because as I'm sure most of you know, Darwinism isn't really a thing that's currently something people do or accept or anything like that. So, yeah, it's a really weird statement. But, that being said, unless anyone has something really important, we're gonna just go ahead and start, because I don't even have a guest to hang out with. Phil Punk says we should have a new PC fundraiser stream. Yeah, I probably will. I might be waiting a little bit, because the next thing that's really going to make me need a new computer is probably the end of life for Windows 10, because myself, along with almost everyone else, has not made the switch over to 11, because from everything I hear, 11 kind of sucks. But eventually, coming up in a bit over a year, they are going to be ending support for Windows 10, and I'm gonna probably have to get a new computer. I'll probably hopefully get one with a better graphics card for rendering, maybe some more RAM. Definitely gonna upgrade the boot drive, although my external drives are still gonna be just transferring straight over. They're just gonna plug right in. So, but yeah, there's a fair chance I'll have a new computer fundraising drive. And of course, hey, the fundraising drive for me to have a fancy avatar, or for Bent to get more free pizza, is on. I believe somewhere around 111%, a little bit over, is where Bent gets new pizza this time, or sorry, gets pizza this time. So if you want Bent to have some free pizza for his birthday, because it is his birthday today, you can make it happen. But other than that, I'm going to hit play, and before I do, please make sure you hit like. So here we go. Okay, so that is an interesting two-part question. But first, Cognitive Trifurcation, who's been a member for 5 months, says, I will form a hacker collective to continue supporting Windows 10 like happened with LEGO Universe. Also, AIG is a package of packages. I'll take a drink for that. That's a good one. Okay, so what is science? So that's actually kind of a tough question, right? For me, the thing that puts things in the science category is testability, including falsifiability. Oh, and you didn't hear her ask the question. I'll back up a little bit. Sorry. That's a Dapper as a professional, so we'll drink for that.
Wow, those are some bold statements. What is science, and
There you go.
does it actually prove evolution?
Okay, so like I said, testability, falsifiability, very important. Also, empiricism, right? Science is based on data. If what you're doing isn't based on data, what you're doing isn't science. Even if you think it's testable and it is demonstrable, for instance, things that are testable and demonstrable include things like math, right? You can test math, but math is not strictly empirical. You have to gather data about numbers in order to come up with statistical models to create hypotheses about math. In math, we use axioms, we use theorems, and we use proofs. Data, not really part of it. We got a couple super chats. Star Song says, for $20, happy birthday, Bent. Here is for pizza. Thank you very much. And for $9.99, Roshina Autocatalytic Keller, good little confidence today, says, happy birthday, Bent. Thank you very much. So I will update the tracker. We are on our way. So now within that realm of testing, empiricism, falsificationism, all that stuff, right? Now, what's another part that's important to me, at least, is openness. If you need to be able to have your data and your analysis and your methods open to scrutiny so that other people can test these things. Because if you're hiding all that data and all your techniques and your mechanical apparatus and whatnot that you're using to do these experiments or observations away, then other people can't really help. Like, check you. That's another big thing, is being open and honest with your techniques, with your results, with the data. So there's more to science than just those things, but I think at that point, you're getting a pretty good sense for what I would consider to be science. Can it prove evolution? No, because science can't prove anything, right? Punk Half Dog Half Canine for $2 says, I'm broke, but I do have a Raspberry Hefeweizen. Ooh, that does sound nice. Yeah, that sounds nice. Oop, I almost put in the wrong number here. So, but the other thing is, that doesn't mean that we can't gain knowledge from science, right? So, what is knowledge? Well, fundamentally, knowledge, at least in the philosophical sense, right, is a belief that you hold, which you hold for justifiable reasons, and which is true. And I would argue that we can gain knowledge about the universe through science, because I think that scientific support, at least strong scientific support for an idea, is generally a justifiable reason to accept that idea. And those ideas that have the best support are likely to be true, which means that most of the ideas that are well supported by science are likely to be true, at least within a limited application, right? They might not be complete universal truths for all time and all places, but they might be true, at least provisionally, under the circumstances which were under investigation. So an example might be like Newton's laws. You can know things about how physics works via Newton's laws. Now, are they always going to work in all circumstances? No, that's why Einstein came along. But that doesn't mean that you don't know the things that you knew because of Newton in the context in which it worked. So has evolution been demonstrated to a similar level of confidence as, say, Newton's laws? I would argue yes. So, there we go. Oh, and Landon Knoll came in and said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone and latitude, from your astronomer guide to our favorite universe. Hello, Dapper Dinosaur, and happy birthday to Bent. I will make sure he gets those birthday messages. I think he might be watching. I'm not really sure. So here we go. Let's see what this guy has to say about that very same question.
Scott, you speak for Creation Ministries International.
I'm sorry, I said ICR, didn't I? Yeah, this is CMI. So for those of you who don't know, Creation Ministries International used to be Answers in Genesis until Ken Ham broke away and kept the name. So there you go.
You've spoken at over 500 churches across the United States, and you hear often as many...
I love how speaking at churches is somehow some kind of, credential in this world. Like, oh my goodness, you spoke at 1,000 churches. You must be very, very trustworthy when it comes to science. Like, no, that's not what that means.
Of us do that evolution is fact, and the Bible's just stories.
Well... Okay, so I hate how this is phrased, so I'm going to take a drink so I can cool down my brain and talk about this. Mark Akamoto 1313 Smith says, I know that I don't know. Does that count? Actually, I would argue that, yes, it does. So you believe that you are ignorant about many things. You have good reason to think that you are ignorant about many things. And because you are a finite human, I would argue that it is inevitable that you are, in fact, ignorant about a great many things. And so, yes, you can say that you don't know. Okay, so evolution is a fact, and the Bible is a book of stories. Well, first of all, while there are things besides stories in the Bible, it is primarily made up of stories. Most of what you get in the Bible is narrative text describing events happening to characters. That's what a story is, right? It's a series of events in a narrative that occur to characters or they're caused by characters, ultimately. So is the Bible a book of stories? Primarily, the answer is yes. But does that answer the question as to whether or not these stories are historically accurate? No, it doesn't. Because an actual literal history of the world that detailed in complete accuracy every single event that ever happened to every single person who ever lived, if such a thing were to hypothetically exist, it would still be a book of stories, and it would be true. So we can't know if the Bible is true just on the basis of, is it a book of stories? Now, if you say something is just a story, usually what you then mean is that it's only a story and it is not literally true. So if you asked, is the Bible a book of just stories? Well, I would say that that's also not true. For one thing, like I said, it contains things that aren't stories, but also some of the stories in there, we know at least have some historical backing. So for instance, Cyrus the Great conquering Babylon and setting the various captive Israelites free to return to their land of Israel, where they then rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, and then a scroll of the law was found. Like, all of those bits of story, like the reign of Josiah, all that's probably reasonably accurate. We have good reason to think Josiah was real. We know, the conquest of Babylon was real. We know Cyrus the Great was real. Or is it Darius that is the one in the story that... Either way, I don't remember if it's Darius or Cyrus, but we know that that event really happened. We know that there was a building of a subsequent temple. Like, we have all of this stuff from archaeology and other sources. We know all that stuff's pretty reasonably accurate. But then things like Noah's flood. Well, we know that that's not a real event that happened, at least not as described in the Bible. So, the Bible is a mixed bag of many, many different books, making many, many claims, some of which are literally true, some of which aren't. So, there's no one answer to that. Is evolution a fact? Well, it is a fact in the sense that universal common ancestry is extremely well established. Morphological change across generations is also just a brute fact of the world. We watch evolution, in fact, happen in real time all over the world. So in some ways, yes, evolution is a fact. And the facts of evolution are interpreted and explained and predicted by the theory of evolution, which takes all of those observations and puts them under a theoretical framework that allows us to correlate these otherwise disparate kinds of data and understand them all in a way that lets us predict the results of future experiments or predict where to find fossils in the future. So, turns out there's a whole lot to that question.
So, is evolution fact and the biblical account of creation just a story?
You know, Don, that's an assertion that we've heard over and over again.
I mean, yes, it is. Only because that seems to be where the evidence is pointing, but okay.
Like you said, they'll say, science has proven evolution to be true.
No one should be saying that. I'm going to take a drink. Unless by proof, you just mean in a very colloquial, loosey-goosey sense, where, like, it just means it's been well evidenced, then okay, sure, maybe, I guess, in that sense.
And when the Bible talks about that God created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in them in 6 days, they say, that sounds like a fairy tale.
Okay, so what are fairy tales? To me, fairy tales are stories that involve significant influences from supernatural events and that also frequently involve things like supernatural beings like goblins or ghosts or things like that, or talking animals. And I just want to point out that the primordial history from Genesis 1 through 11 includes numerous supernatural agents doing stuff like God walking around in the garden, forming the earth out of the waters of chaos, stuff like that. And it also includes at least one talking animal. So I would argue that, sort of definitionally, yeah, the primordial history is a fairy tale in the broad sense. Is it likely to get collected into, collections of fairy tales? Well, no, because also most fairy tales aren't creation narratives. So like, it's fairy tale adjacent. I'll say that. It's fairy tale adjacent. Roshina Autocatalytic Keller for $4.99 says, prediction, the huge part of science that young Earth creationists like to pretend doesn't exist. Yes, they do like to ignore the fact that predictions exist.
So, but it might be surprising to know that even evolutionists, they have some storytelling in their theory as well.
What do you mean by storytelling, Scott? Can
Good
you tell me
question.
more?
Sure. Well, for instance, let's say that you would open up a textbook or perhaps watch a documentary about evolution. You got to understand that in those sources, there are vast details that truly are not based on any scientific facts.
Well, so, goodness. The only thing I can think of that he's talking about here is things like paleontology reconstructions, right? So, like, if you go watch, like, Walking with Dinosaurs or Prehistoric Planet or any of those, yeah, they're going to have to fill in gaps in paleontological knowledge with plausible reconstructions, because that's literally the only option. You can't show a living extinct organism that's only known from fossils without adding something that is not preserved, right? Like skin, muscles, organs, eyeballs. All of these are things that are typically not preserved. Now, does that mean that we're trying to trick you by pretending that, I don't know, like the Triceratops had skin? Well, no, pretty sure it had skin. Pretty sure it had eyeballs. I mean, it has eye sockets, so, you know, what was it using those for if it wasn't eyeballs? So yeah, that's the only thing I can think of that he's talking about. But maybe he's not. Maybe he's just making up a whole conspiracy. Because, I mean, fundamentally, young Earth creationism, it's a conspiracy theory.
And maybe I can better illustrate that by telling you a little story that comes from a movie that a lot of people have seen, the original film Jurassic Park.
I do like that movie, and I have seen it. All right, let's find out how many people here have seen it. All right, we'll start a poll. Have you seen Jurassic Park, 1993? We get yes, no, and of course, which are not dinosaurs. All right, here we go.
You might have remembered that there was a character, his name was Dr. Alan Grant, and he was actually probably modeled after the great Jack Horner, the #1
This is correct. We'll take a drink.
dinosaur paleontologist in the world. But this Dr. Grant was actually on a fossil dig, and there were a bunch of people, including some youngsters that were out there, and he was describing to them the find that they had just made, specifically of Velociraptor.
Well, I mean, it was a movie Velociraptor, which is like, you know, a Deinonychus the size of an ostrich or something, but sure, whatever.
And one of these young boys, he said, well, it looks like a 6-foot turkey to me.
Which is weird, because turkey skeletons don't actually look that much like Deinonychus skeletons. I mean, they look more like Deinonychus skeletons than they look like whale skeletons, but I don't know. I always did wonder, like, how did that kid come to that conclusion? Looking at that skeleton, because it doesn't look like a turkey to me. But then again, maybe I'm a weirdo who looks too much at skeletons. Actually, I'm definitely a weirdo who looks too much at various animal skeletons. Yeah, that's absolutely a thing.
And Dr. Grant decided to take that opportunity to set this boy straight and actually scare him. He started talking about the hunting characteristics of Velociraptor. He pictured that one of their kind, the Velociraptor, would come and stare that boy right in the eyes. And then he would explain that there would be 2 Velociraptors on either side that would be attacking him, because he said that's the way that they hunted. And then he took the 6-inch retractable claw that was part of that fossil discovery, and then he pretended to slash the boy's stomach open, scaring him to bits.
Fearmonger points out, the kid said it because the script needed Dr. Grant to creep out a child. Yes, that is the real reason. Good point.
And then saying that the disemboweled prey would be eaten by these velociraptors. And I'm telling you,
while still alive. Remember that line. And you're still alive when they begin to eat. Something like that.
He scared that boy, but good. But let me ask you a question, Don. In that story that he told, what would be the actual facts?
Okay. Oh, this is painful. I'm going to take a drink. Okay, Jurassic Park, while it did have a paleontology consultant and it was trying to be reasonably accurate, was obviously not shooting for scientific accuracy as its highest goal. I mean, they know that, say, Dilophosaurus got much bigger, and the Velociraptor, even if they were conflating Velociraptor with Deinonychus, which they were, they know that both of those animals weren't nearly that big. They were changing things deliberately. The reason that line is the way it is to set up foreshadowing for the later hunting behavior displayed by the film's velociraptors. If you want to actually make a good argument on this, you should go to an actual documentary whose goal is education, and then ask that about something there, right? Like, go to the recent Prehistoric Planet and look at the velociraptor hunting scene there, right? Where they're hunting for, like, I don't know, was it pterosaur eggs or something? I don't actually remember. And ask that question. Going to a movie that is intentionally not being as accurate as possible for dramatic purposes, not a good way to do this. No one has ever recommended that you get your paleontological information from Jurassic Park. Star Song for $5 says, I'm working on acquiring some hardware to post my videos. Wish me well. I have some subjects I'm interested in. Well, good luck. I hope that it all goes well. Getting video making equipment can be a pain. Here we go.
If any.
Well, the only concrete evidence would be that 6-inch claw, right?
Well, again, except that neither Velociraptor nor Deinonychus had a claw that big. But also, the idea that they were meat-eating can be well established. They have teeth that are really only suited to slicing through flesh. It is very hard to come up with a good reason for a gigantic hypertrophy digit 2 claw other than some kind of prey. We also have direct evidence of Velociraptor using it in a fight with a Protoceratops in the fighting dinosaur skeleton. So while that might not have been able to be accessed directly from the dig the kid was at, if we just hypothetically pretend it's a real dig, there's that. We also do know that while Velociraptor certainly wasn't as smart as portrayed in the stories, for a late Cretaceous dinosaur, it was probably pretty smart because we have cranial endocasts and we can make a decent determination as to its brain size. Sorry. Asta Frog Disarmament 2, Kent Boogaloo Ryu for $4.99 says, when you're so anti-intellectual that you think judging the Bible or Jurassic Park for trueness is a good idea, even CinemaSins is better than this. Yeah, and I do not have a lot of nice things to say about CinemaSins either. All right, so we can determine a lot of stuff. We can also determine that Velociraptor was a very fast creature because of its limb proportions. So we know how big muscles are based on their 2 different detachment points, and so we can look at where those attachment points are on the limb, then look at the proportions of the limb and determine how fast it could reasonably run. We know that Velociraptor was pretty fast. Do we know if it was social and did, like, ambush hunting? No, we don't. We don't have any reason to say that those things were true. In fact, I strongly suspect that neither of those things are true. So there's actually quite a lot from that story that we can get right. Now, you're still alive when they eat you. I mean, most predators today do not have any qualms about waiting until their prey is dead before they start to eat the prey. That being said, there's no way to know for sure whether or not most prey would have been alive or dead by the time Velociraptor started eating. Mark Akamoto 1313 Smith for $5 says, might as well get your paleontology from the B&W land of the lost. Yeah, I mean, there's no good reason to get your paleontology information from movies or TV shows that are just there for entertainment and have dinosaurs as stand-ins for monsters. But I'm going to drink for the Godzilla. Roshina Autocatalytic Keller for $1.99 says, they use their claws to climb trees. I mean, that is actually a distinct possibility, right? They very well could have. I don't know if they would use the hypertrophy claw. That seems to have been held up or off the ground to keep it as sharp as possible, which indicates that it probably wasn't used in locomotion, whether it be climbing or running. But other than that, yeah, I mean, they probably did use their claws to climb. Goop23 et al. For $5 says, The Simpsons is lying about anthropology because humans aren't yellow. Exactly. See, you can't trust the secular community out there. Look at that secular show, The Simpsons, with its yellow people, even yellow God. Come on. That's blasphemous right there. All right, here we go.
Exactly. The only thing that we knew for a fact was actually the fossilized velociraptor that they had found on this dig. And by the way,
No, you can include other velociraptor finds. That's one of the things that bugs me about this, and creationism in general, is they like to take all sorts of things in isolation, when in fact there is much more data than that available. So they'll say things like, well, if you found one velociraptor at one dig, what could you tell from it? Well, okay, but I can bring in data from other velociraptors, like the Fighting Dinosaurs velociraptor. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. And it bugs me when they pretend that it's not.
Velociraptor was not 6 feet tall. Interestingly enough, they used that particular dinosaur in the movie because a 6-foot tall velociraptor is a lot scarier than what they really were.
Yeah, but that's not because the movie was lying to you, my guy. It's because it was just a movie, and I don't understand why we're even talking about movies. Lesbiandria for 65 sex. Thank you very much. I always appreciate when someone donates sex. Says, sure, creationist, I'll agree. Your creation story is as true as the Jurassic Park franchise. Yeah. Actually, the Jurassic Park franchise gets the science more close to right than young Earth creationism does, because at least they're not wrong about, like, the timescales involved. So, there's that.
But you've got to understand there is a lot of storytelling, not just in that scene, but in evolution.
Roshna Autocatalytic Killer for 199 says, Yellow God has 5 fingers, and Yellow Jesus has 4. You know, I knew that Yellow God had 5 fingers, but I never really noticed with the any depictions of Jesus. That's interesting. I wonder why. I mean, I figure the reason that the God character has 5 fingers is because his hand is usually, like, gigantic, so they have more room to carefully draw hands. So maybe that's it. But yeah, I don't know. Roshna, if you do know why, let me know.
In general, a better term would be an interpretation of the facts.
No, Jurassic Park isn't an interpretation of the facts. It's just making shit up. Nakedly and openly. It's just making some shit up, and it's using the facts to ground the narrative in as much plausibility as it needs to get the made-up stuff off the ground, right? It's just like Star Trek. There's no such thing as a Heisenberg compensator or warp coils or warp plasma or any of this other crap. But you need to get some stuff that's reasonably plausible. So, you know, Star Trek has things like, how do we account for time dilation? Well, we synchronize clocks whenever we enter a new system. And it has things like, you know, there's a bit where Picard says, oh, hey, turn off the tractor beam. And Riker's all like, but won't that leave the ship behind? And he's like, no, momentum. It'll just follow along, because neither of us are accelerating, so we don't need to waste power on the tractor beam. They establish some ground rules that are consistent with real-world physics, so that for the most part, you can predict what's going to happen, and then they add in a few extra bits that help facilitate the story, and then once just enough to facilitate the story is done, they don't bother hyper-explaining everything else. Jurassic Park is just doing that. Although, you know, there's a whole lot less made-up stuff to get it to work, because, I mean, fundamentally, bringing back dinosaurs is a far more plausible idea than, you know, super luminal speeds and, you know, everybody being a humanoid. So,
and you know, when we go into a museum or perhaps open a textbook, we're going to find some fantastical stories that are going to go into perhaps the way a dinosaur lives and what it ate.
Okay, well then why didn't you just start with that? Start with a textbook example that you think is fanciful and as little well supported as the size of Jurassic Park velociraptors. Just start there. You don't need to tell me that a made-up movie is made up. I get it. Astro Frog Disarmament 2, Kent Boogaloo Ryu for $4.99 says, it's an effing action flick. Do you think this guy watched Eternals, seething that they claim that bootleg Icarus is real and not Jesus? Yeah, I mean, well, okay, knowing them, they probably did see it about that. They probably did see.
But much of that is not fact. It's actually an interpretation.
So if the paradigm of evolution is not solely based on...
Oh yeah, also I forgot this was supposed to be about evolution. I'm sorry, but talking about the actual life habits of a dinosaur is not the same thing as evolution, right? Evolution could be completely false, and you could still get the same interpretation of the life events and the lifestyle of a dinosaur. For instance, there are like old Earth creationists, progressive creationists, etc., who accept the actual timescales involved in the, you know, history of Earth, and who don't accept universal common ancestry, but who also could just come up with the exact same kind of explanations for like various anatomy and behavior in dinosaurs. So we're already off topic. Star Song for $5 says, "Say it ain't so. Hausdorff lenses aren't real. They live, though, as I understand it, Heisenberg compensators aren't necessary for transporters. So, no, they're not real, and I was under the impression that they were necessary, but hey, what do I know? I think maybe they're only necessary for transporting living things and having them still be alive at the other end. That might be it.
Objective evidence. Why do scientists say that it is fact?
Well, it's interesting because it is true that the bulk of modern day practicing scientists, they do claim that evolution is fact.
Well over 1 in 1,000, by the way, especially when you constrict it to relevant fields. I ended the poll. We have you seen Jurassic Park 1993? Yes at 82%, Turtle at 9%, no at 8% with 74 votes. I do recommend everyone who voted no to go see Jurassic Park from 1993 after we watch this. It is an excellent movie. So, there you go. Also, I have to say, I've seen 102 people watching, but only 48 likes, which means that, once again, unfortunately, I must say that I like less than half of you, half as well as you deserve. So hit like so I don't have to quote Bilbo anymore.
But Don, you've got to understand this. They're starting out with a world view, and their worldview determines their interpretation of the facts. Now, evolutionists have a worldview, but so do creationists. In fact, when I go into churches and I'm speaking to young people, I'll actually use this in order to describe a worldview. I'll take off my glasses and I might look at someone in the back of the room and I'll just say, now I can see that that man back there has no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. But then I go like this and I go, oops, I was wrong. He does have an eyes, nose, and mouth.
Asked a Frog Disarmament 2, Kent Boogaloo Ryu for $4.99 says, practicing scientists? Am I getting punked by Poe's law? So I don't think so, because if I remember correctly, this guy does have, like, a whole body of, like, talks and whatnot that he's given, and all of them are just, like, low-level creationist nonsense, but it seems like either he's, like, deep undercover, or this is his real thing. Starsong for $5 says, They Live is a movie, worth watching at least one time. I agree, I quite enjoy They Live. And then Fits of Reptile Eggs Crumble Like Raisins Rage, you gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much. Let me update both of our numbers here. And then we also have Mark Agamotto1313 Smith for $2 says, what if I want you to quote Bilbo? Well then, don't hit like and wait until I quote Bilbo. Or until the end of the video, I suppose. Alright, here we go. We got 6, but that had a Mothra at the end, so we have 6 drinks to take. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay.
But nothing changed about that man.
Okay, so here's the problem, right? The idea is supposed to be that you take on or off different glasses. That's why they usually say things like, you gotta take off your evolutionist glasses and put on your creationist or your biblical glasses or whatever. The idea being that different things stand out to you and become important to you depending on your worldview. But this guy ruined the analogy because really what he's doing is when he doesn't have his glasses on, he's literally getting less information. He's not getting all the data, right? Because if you think about it, if distant objects become blurry, what that means is they're not focused. And so what's actually happening is that the photons entering his eyes, rather than being focused onto specific points, are actually just scattering across. And so he's unable to resolve all of the information that's there. It just turns into extra noise. But when he puts his glasses on and it corrects that focusing problem, well, now what's happening? Well, now what's happening is that that data that was lost due to noise and being unfocused is brought back. And the problem is that actually does better track onto creationism, but not the way he wants it to. Because creationists routinely ignore data. In fact, I just noticed that same thing happening in a Sanford and Roop paper, which I'll talk to you about right after I noticed that Joshua Geese has gifted 5 more Dapper Dinosaur memberships. I want to say thank you very much for that. Take 5 drinks. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, in the video that I just recently put up for early access, there's a bit where a figure from a Sanford and Roop quote-unquote paper, as far as I can tell, it was only ever just like dumped onto the internet as a PDF, but whatever. They claim to find this amazingly good fit for I think it's a first order polynomial curve that they're fitting to the ages of biblical figures, starting with Noah and then going after the flood, right? But the thing is, this curve only gets this amazing fit as a result of which data points they picked to put into their whole thing. So basically, they follow the genealogy from Noah to Shem, all the way through like I think like Jacob or something like that. I don't remember exactly. I would have to double check. But they follow it through a good like 12 or 13 generations, right? They don't include Ham or Japheth. Now, to be fair, Ham and Japheth aren't given years of death in the Bible, so I guess you could argue they don't have those data points, although they could put them in there in they could make favorable to them assumptions and still put them in there. So there is that. But then there's a big gap until you get to King David. And then there's an even bigger gap until you get to, quote, average Roman life expectancy. And the problem is that the only way you get this ridiculously good fit is with those very distant tails. Because what they do is they basically define the curve, and then the data points where you're going generation by generation don't fit the curve very well, whereas those distant data points are exactly on it, because what they're doing is they're actually defining the curve. So of course you get a fantastically good fit because of those data points. But if you include all of the known deaths in the Bible where we can either know or estimate a generation number from Noah, according to the internal narrative, and you exclude the deaths from, say, violence or plague or something, so just people who got old and died, you include all those numbers, and instead of including average Roman Roman life expectancy, and instead you put in Roman lifespan, because it's supposed to be a chart of lifespan, you suddenly can't use that fit so well anymore. So the only way to get that fit is to cherry pick which data you will use and which data won't use. And so that's just one example. And basically, that's a trend in creationism. Creationists routinely just chuck out large amounts of the data that is available in any particular area in order to get the answer they want. It is a fundamentally dishonest thing to do, but they do it routinely. And so he's actually demonstrably more like the creationist with his glasses off. And then when he finally can actually put his glasses on and get all the data, he comes to a different conclusion. That's what science is doing. It's looking at all the data. So never let any creationist tell you, well, you and I have the same data. We just interpret it differently. Because no, the creationists don't. They purposefully exclude data. So here we go.
You see, the light reflecting off of his face was coming into my retina either way, but it was being focused by these lenses that I wear. So a worldview is the way we focus and understand data. It's a presupposition that scientists use. Basically, they're going to end up ignoring any scientific evidence that might be contrary to what they believe. For example,
I'm just going to take a drink for the creationists talking about real scientists ignoring the data that isn't convenient to them, when it's been demonstrated numerous times that creationists routinely ignore approximately 90% of any data that's available.
Using the biblical historical account.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Why would scientists not use the Bible as data? Because it's not, right? First of all, even if you want to say it's historical evidence, history and science aren't the same thing. Historical evidence isn't scientific evidence. They're just not the same thing. Nether who's been a member for 8 months since at the Tetraball level, I've got a cough today, I guess, says creationists have the same data but ignore 99% plus. Usually the figure I can find, for which, to be fair, I'm depending on Wheat and Downard, says about 90%. But yeah, your basic idea is right. So even if we claim the Bible is an eyewitness account that is infallible, it's still not technically scientific data, because at any given point, it's really only giving us one data point per phenomenon, which is not enough to really do anything with. Second, we happen to know that basically nothing in the Bible is a first-hand eyewitness account, which means that even historically, it's not even really very good historical evidence. Now, in some cases, it's okay historical evidence, but it really does need corroboration because of the distance from its writing to the events being depicted. So, no matter how true or false the Bible might be, it's not valid scientific or historical evidence. For most things, at least. Some things in the New Testament were written closer, and so might provide a little bit of eyewitness account. Like, there's probably more historicity to, say, the book of Acts than there is for, say, the book of Daniel. But even then, we don't know how close to the events it was written, or how unbiased the author is regarding those events. So, like, was there a real Council of Jerusalem? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem implausible. Did it happen exactly as depicted in Acts? Well, the author of Acts clearly has a side that he favors. So, how do we know that he didn't favor his account in terms of the side of the Council of Jerusalem that he was on? We don't have an answer to that question. Vendali 1998 for $10 says, speaking of excluding data, I don't think they talk about how long they think people will still lived and had kids post-flood when they are trying to repopulate the earth after everyone died. So they don't talk about it holistically as part of like an overarching model, as far as I can tell. But they do talk about it in isolation when they're trying to talk about like things like patriarchal drive or the amazing decay rate of ages after the flood. Song for $10 says, when I was a creationist, I used to ignore scientific data all the time. I was indoctrinated to believe that anything that went against what I was taught was by definition false. And yeah, that's what creationism teaches you. And so it's a requirement to ignore data. In fact, creationist journals typically either have like statements of faith you have to sign on to, or conclusions that you cannot disagree with in order to publish there. That's not how science works. Science does not have prescribed beliefs from the outset that you must accept. Instead, it has data, and it says if you can't follow the data, then you're not doing science. But if you are, it doesn't really matter what conclusion you come up with, as long as it actually corresponds to the data. So, here we go.
So, Scott, are you saying that the biblical account is actually scientific?
Well, Don, we first need to understand.
I like how he can't just answer that, because the answer is very obviously no, but he can't just say that.
Dan, really what that term science means.
Yeah, that was her first question. You could have answered it.
So the first thing that people usually think about when they hear about science is what we call operational or experimental science. And then perhaps maybe when you were in school, you used the scientific method. Do you remember doing that? Sure. That's where you would develop a hypothesis, perform an experiment, make observations, record data, and then you could repeat it. See,
but here's the problem. All of those are things you can do with evolution. There are even things you can do with paleontology. But because most of evolution has occurred in the past, and because paleontology is always about the past, then people like CMI and ICR and AIG just like to erect a barrier and say, well, you can't do experiments about the past. Bullshit. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. Every time anyone predicts where a new fossil will be found, and then they go and find it, that is a successful prediction about future data made from observations about evolutionary biology, paleontology. And sure, those are sciences about the past, but they can still tell us what will happen in the future. And we can test them that way.
Operational science is done in the present, right in front of our eyes, perhaps in the laboratory.
Okay, so like paleontology, which is done in the present. I mean, there's also historical paleontology, but it's no less being done in the present than chemistry is, right? If I have a fossilized bone in front of me and I'm taking measurements of it and weighing it and comparing it to other fossilized bones, all of that is happening in the present.
You know, as an example, let's say someone did not believe in the law of gravity. Well, we could test that law. We could go into a laboratory, we could drop various objects, we could make observations, we could record data, and then we could repeat it until we determine whether that law were valid or not.
Yeah. And you can do the same thing with evolutionary biology. You can go and do various experiments. There are numerous famous experiments. There are famous fruit fly experiments, there are famous bacterial experiments. The problem is that, yeah, sure, it's hard to get the same type of experiments with, like, big, long-lived mammals. So, you're probably not going to be able to reproduce all of the famous, like, fruit fly or bacterium evolutionary biology experiments with, like, giraffes or elephants or something. But that's as a practical matter. The same thing is true for, like, if you're trying to do experiments in botany with, like, fast-growing plants, you might not be able to reproduce those results if you then go to, say, like, I don't know, redwood trees. But that doesn't mean that redwood trees are suddenly magical.
So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about experimental and operational science.
Yet most people believe that.
Notice that at no point did he actually point out a reason why evolution cannot fall under the operational science side of this, because it absolutely can. We watch evolution happen in the present. Everything about evolution is currently testable. We can even test our ideas about reconstructing phylogenies from the past by using present experiments. There's actually an experiment that people have run numerous times to test this, right? Where you say, okay, we're going to culture bacterial cultures, right? We're going to start with a single culture from a single, relatively clonal colony. Okay. Now we grow it in a petri dish after we isolate it. So, you have an initial petri dish, then you do some swabs of that. You draw out the bacterial stain so you can get, like, just a tiny, tiny number of bacteria to start with. You grow that in a colony. Okay, cool. Now you take strains and you put them in two separate petri dishes. You keep labeling them, right? And then you do this multiple generations. Each time you double the number of petri dishes, which means that even if it's just genetic drift, every single petri dish is going to have its own line that is going to be genetically distinct from the other lines, and because you're not crossing the lines back over, they can't conjugate to then transfer genes. So you're getting complete genetic separation artificially. And then you do this over many generations, and eventually you have a giant collection of your final generation of petri dishes. And then what you do is you mix up the labels, but keep track of what you did, right? Then you hand the relabeled petri dishes off to another team to sequence their DNA and use phylogenetic techniques to reconstruct the most likely ancestry. But you know the exact correct ancestry because you've been keeping track. You know exactly which petri dishes are most closely related and which ones are least closely related. So there is an objective right answer that you determined with an experiment in the present. And you know what happens when you run this experiment? You routinely get returned to you as the most likely tree, a tree identical to the actual tree. Which means that we know that our techniques for using phylogenetics to recover phylogenetic trees are reliable. And how did we do it? Did we do it by making assumptions about the past? No. We tested it here in the present, using operational science. We can use this operational science to absolutely validate techniques that we use to infer relatedness in the past. And if we can infer relatedness in the past of a known experiment that was done in real time by experimenters, why does it stop working once it gets, say, a few thousand years ago? There's no good answer. Vandalian 1998 for $5 says, they don't think historical science can be observed, so it's not real. So why do they think actual history is real? Well, since they can't observe that either. Well, because, see, God observed it. So it doesn't matter if they observed it, because if God can observe it, well, then there you go. It's all problem solved.
Science proves evolution.
And that's the interesting thing, because you see, when we're dealing with something in the past, which of course evolution is something that we can't observe.
Hey, fun fact, every experiment ever is in the past. There's some that are about to happen, but by the time you are able to get your hands on their results, even if you're the one doing the experiment, it's in the past. All science is about the past. I'm taking a drink.
Dealing with a different kind of science. You see, here we're talking about historic, or what many call forensic science. Now,
remember, if this guy's about to toss out all of forensic science, we're going to have to set a whole lot of people who are otherwise, we're pretty confident are murderers. We're going to have to set them free. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of people who are currently in prison for crimes they did not commit. That's why I'm a big fan of things like the Innocence Project. However, that is not all of them. And there are a lot of people who were correctly convicted of various horrible crimes as a result of forensic science. Fits of reptile eggs crumble like raisins. Rage says, is experimenter correct? I mean, it's what you call someone who's doing an experiment. If you're asking me if that's a real word, then I believe the answer is yes. If you're asking whether or not that was used in the correct context, I'm not sure because I don't remember the exact context it was used in. Astrofrog Disarmament 2, Kent Boogaloo, for $4.99 says, except humans had to write about what God observed, so even then history isn't real. Yeah, that's another thing, is because not even CMI thinks that the Bible was being written down by God as it happened directly onto tablets or parchments or whatever. Like, it's still a human account of the past. That's still what the Bible is, even according to Christian theology. Or at least, traditional Christian theology about the scriptures. Mr. Cliff for £2 says, no, I'm late to the party again with a crying emoji. That's okay, it's better late than never. It's a lot better late than never. Alright, here we go.
Let's say in the same way that someone believed that a fish, over millions and millions and millions of years, passing on its genetic information to future generations, could, through the process of natural selection and random mutation, actually have genome or DNA material in one of its offspring millions of years later where it would sprout new novel structures.
Like what? Tetrapods don't have any novel structures that weren't already in their fishy ancestors. Your forelimbs are pectoral fins. Your hind limbs are they're pectoral fins. I mean, your fingers are fundamentally rays. Right? They're ossified fin rays. We know this because the same genes control the same bones in, like, fish as they do in tetrapods. You can get the same kind of responses to your developmental genes if you mimic the signaling patterns of tetrapod developmental genes in non-tetrapod fish. There's nothing new under the sun in terms of evolution, really, fundamentally. Everything you have is a modified version of what your ancestors had. There's not a single new structure that you can really point to. You can even say, like, what about lungs? The first fish didn't have lungs, except that lungs are just modified as part of your digestive system. They're literally an outgrowth of your stomach. Now, tetrapods have developed for so long that that's no longer immediately obvious, but it's much more obvious in more primitive organisms where the stomach and the lungs are much more tightly bound together. And in fact, modern teleost fish, which is most fish, some of them still gulp air into their stomach and get oxygen that way. And that's how they survive low oxygen environments under the water, is by literally swallowing air and having some of the oxygen in the air dissolve into their bloodstream through their stomach. Like, there's nothing new
that would allow this fish to walk up onto the land. Now, if that were true, can you do an experiment to show that's the case?
Yes. Yes, you can. I've already described some of them, using embryonic organisms that test the signaling patterns that are dictated by different regulatory sequences for the same developmental gene. You can test this directly. I mean, the answer is just a flat yes.
No.
Okay.
I'm just going to take a drink. Of course you can. We've already done it. This is already experiments that have been done. In fact, I would suggest if you want to read more about some of these experiments at a popular level, I would highly recommend reading Neil Shubin's Finding Your Inner Fish. It is an excellent lay-level overview. I'm sure by now it's a little bit dated, but not that much dated. The experiments that are described are still experiments that happened. And it really will give you a really good appreciation for just how much your anatomy is exactly the same as the anatomy of, say, like a carp. Like, it really is.
Is it observable?
No.
Yes. It is not only observable in experiment today with various embryological experiments using things like Hox genes and mimicking signals from regulatory genes. It's also visible in the fossil record, where before the fossils were found, predictions were made about what kinds of intermediary stages we should see and then those fossils were found, which is predicting future data about the past, which is why, quote unquote, historical science is real science. It still makes testable, falsifiable predictions. So, yes, you can absolutely test this and you can watch it happen, granted, through the lens of fossils. But yeah, fossils that evolution predicted, and that creationism did not predict, and at best just kind of accommodated later.
Can you repeat it?
No.
Well, I mean, okay, so can you repeat the actual transition from from sea to land of fish turning into tetrapods? Well, no. But on the other hand, can you reproduce various steps with modern organisms and get analogous results? Absolutely. In fact, we don't even have to experiment in order to get analogous results. There are fish today that are teleost fish, not lobefin fish, that have different levels of terrestriality. Mudskippers almost never actually fully submerge themselves. They're basically terrestrial fish. Now, they're terrestrial in the same way that, like, say, a frog is, in that, you know, they do sometimes swim and they do have to reproduce in the water. But as adults, they spend pretty much their entire lives above water. We have other fish, like walking catfish, who are very adept at terrestrial locomotion, but usually use it to go between ponds, right? And then on top of that, we can do things like test phenotypic plasticity and to see how much of that helped with the evolution of land-based vertebrates, with things like brashears, which are very basal teleost fish, who can be raised above water, but they still have to be raised with a lot of water around. But when they're raised without being able to swim, they develop more robust pectoral girdles and can move around on land in a much more robust fashion than the ones that you raise in a tank. So, like, and the thing is, when you say, when can we repeat this? Depending on how exact you want to be, the answer is always going to be no, right? So you could say, well, what's something that's imminently repeatable? Well, testing the material properties of, say, a bar of steel, right? You can say, okay, what is the tensile strength of this bar of steel? And then you can test like 40 different bars of steel and get all your data and put it together, and you can keep repeating that test. But what if I say, but you're not testing the same bar of steel each time? How do you know that this is applicable to other bars of steel that you haven't tested? Because you aren't able to test each bar of steel. So it's not really repeatable, because, you know, when you zoom in at the microscopic level, the crystal matrices in each one of those bars of steel is going to be different. That's going to cause it to fail at different points. It's going to cause different amounts of plastic deformation. It's going to cause different amounts of tensile versus compressive strength. All of these things are going to be different between different bars of steel. Okay, yeah, sure, I guess in that sense it's not replicable. And that's the sense in which I mean. Is it replicable in the sense that we can reproduce the actual historical events that led to the first tetrapods? No. But we don't need to, just like we don't need to test every single exact bar of steel destructively, which we couldn't do. We can still generalize those results to other bars of steel and come up with an answer for the value of the tensile strength of steel.
So one thing I do, Don, was when I'm in churches, I'll ask the question, I'll hold up a fossil like I am right now, and I'll say, does this fossil exist in the past or the present?
The present. But you know what, though? We're going to take a quick break because it is time for me to refresh my drink. So I will be back in just a little bit. I hope you guys hang in there because I will be back shortly. In the meantime, we're going to have the musical stylings of one Bent Hovind, whose birthday it is. Happy birthday, Bent. I'll be right back. And I am back. Thank you for sticking with me, everybody. So now that we're back, real quick, I just want to say, hey guys, this channel is almost entirely supported directly through your generosity, whether it be through super chats, super stickers, super thanks, gifting memberships, getting your own memberships, joining the Patreon. So if you are currently not supporting the channel financially, but you would like to, and you can afford to, please check out any of those options. The Patreon is linked in the description. The membership is right below this video. There's also a merch store right below with the merch shelf. Also, there is a wish list for myself and for Beethoven, whose birthday it is. So if you want to get any of us anything just as a quick gift, there's that. That being said, if you can't afford it, please don't. And either way, please do make sure you hit like on my videos. Maybe watch a few of my videos in a row. Watch them to the end. Share them. All that stuff helps in the algorithm. And also, I'm only like 13 subscribers away from getting to that 13K. So, you know, share a few videos. Try to get me a few new subscribers so I can hit that 13K. It'd be really nice. Star Song for $10 says, in the absence of any sound, I shall hum to myself. I'm a member of the Brotherhood of Men who hum between words. Wait, there was no sound on the what you call it? The intermission? That's unfortunate. There should have been. Why would there be no sound? Whatever. I'll take a drink for Dapper's professional. All right. I don't understand why sometimes it just turns off the sound on me. I've yet to understand that. One of these days I'll figure out what's wrong with OBS. I should have checked it myself though. But anyway, here we go.
You have any idea how they respond?
I bet they probably say in the past.
Most of them will say in the past, and isn't that interesting?
I mean, I don't know if it's interesting. I guess I can see why, because the fish was alive in the past. But, I mean, the fossil is right here. John Hopkins for $10 says, first time catching a live stream, but I really like your content and have been watching for a while. Also, happy birthday, Bent. Well, thank you so much, John Hopkins, and it is great to have you here. And I'm very, very flattered that you've been liking my content. It really does mean a lot. And John Hopkins just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. My goodness. You guys are amazing. I'm going to take 5 drinks for that. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, Bent could even get a pizza. This would be like his 3rd pizza in a week. Because we went to the grocery store and they had a sale on pizzas, so we got some pizzas.
But I'll clarify the question. I'll say, does this fossil, the one that I'm holding in my hand right now, does it exist in the past or the present? And then they get it. They all say that it's in the present. And isn't it interesting that the first thing they think about when they see a fossil is that it's from millions and millions of years?
No, because that's not what they said. Oh my god, I'm taking another drink. Jeez, man. The past is not synonymous with millions of years ago. Yesterday is the past, my dude. Look, fossils are records of past life, whether or not you're a young Earth creationist. Which means that the animal existed in the past, and what most people think of cognitively when they think about a fossil is the organism who left it behind. And that organism has to exist in the past, or instead of a fossil, you'd have a live animal, or plant, or whatever it is. Right? So, that is not evidence that the first thing they're thinking of is millions of years. Now, maybe they are, and in cases where they're not in your churches, yeah, that's probably the case, but that's incidental. The problem is that you're asking them about a fossil, and most people then immediately think of the live organism, and I do too, right? When I think about fossils, I don't normally think about just a permineralized hunk of rock. I think about the organism, because that's why fossils are interesting to me. They're not interesting because they're cool-shaped rocks. I mean, they are cool-shaped rocks, but what's interesting about them is that their shape is indicative of the shape of parts of an organism's body. That's the cool thing. This in no way indicates that your young Earth creationist audiences at churches have been indoctrinated by the millions of years. It just means they know what a goddamn fossil is. This Scott guy is already really getting on my nerves, and we've only gone through like 8 minutes of this video.
Back in the past. So you see, we have to take the facts that's with us in the present, and we paint a picture of what happens in the past. Because you see,
That's literally what the Bible is doing, though. So I don't see why you think that that's so reliable. I mean, you can say, well, I'm going to start with the assumption of the inspired and infallible nature of the Bible. Okay, that's great. But if other people don't start there, you can't get them to that point by assuming that assuming that fact. That's just begging the question. My pedant for $6.66 says, "Hail Nero, hail Dapper, and hail science. Too bad we can't know anything," he said in this talk, "because it happened in the past." It's true. Oh, yeah, this guy is really, really getting to me. Ugh. You know what? Thank goodness for rum.
The evidence, it doesn't speak for itself.
Oh, hey! Johannes Dahlk just joined the channel memberships at the tetrapod level. Everybody, make sure that you send them some tetrapod emojis. Welcome to the channel memberships. I hope you enjoy it. By the way, now that we have someone who's joined on their own, as well as some 15 or so gifted memberships, I do want to let everyone know that if you are a channel member or a patron and you're not currently on the Discord server, the way you get onto the Discord server is you go to Discord, Settings, Connections, put in your login for the whatever account you have that connects you to my channel, whether it be your YouTube account or your Patreon account. And then below that, it should give you a list of servers that you can now join as a result of your connections. Join the Dapper Dinosaur one. That will automatically put you in, and also importantly, automatically kick you out after what I believe is a 2-week grace period. So what happens is, if you are no longer a member or a patron, you should have 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, you get dropped out. And that's to, cover people who maybe they forgot to make the payment, or like they got a new credit card and forgot to update it or something. And, I just don't want to kick people out immediately. But it is a paid server. You do have to be current on some subscription to be in it. So there you go.
It has to be interpreted. And Don, in churches, I'll ask another question. I'll say, who has the most evidence, evolution or creation?
It's evolution, and it's not even close. I cannot think of any actual evidence that is exclusively supportive of the idea of young Earth creationism or separate creation of organisms or anything like that. Now, if you want to say, what about general creation? I don't know. I haven't really assessed that. If you want to say, like, what do you think the evidences are that there is a God behind the universe at all? I honestly have no clue, because I don't know enough about things like cosmogony and stuff. So, ask someone else. But if you want to say, who has more evidence, young Earth creationism or science in terms of things like the Big Bang and afterwards, the formation of the solar system, the formation of Earth, the formation of the first life, the evolution of that life until the modern period, I can't think of anything that would count as scientific evidence that indicates young Earth creationism is true. Instead, I can think of essentially countless reasons why it's physically impossible. So, I mean, it's evolution. By a lot.
And they say, how many people believe in evolution? How many people believe creation?
Well, if that's your question, then those aren't mutually exclusive things. I'm going to take a quick drink for this because I hate the false dichotomy. Look, if by creation we just mean general creation, that God is ultimately responsible for the existence of the universe, that is completely compatible with fully believing in evolution as science portrays it. Or in a theistic version of evolution in which God comes in and tinkers in hard-to-detect ways in order to get evolution to do what he wants it to do. Those are all compatible. You do not have to reject general creation in order to accept evolution. In fact, most Christians accept both. That is the default setting for most Christians, is to accept both evolution and at least a general creation. So it is a badly formed question, because many people could honestly raise both their hands for both options.
Have any idea what the answer is since I'm in church?
I would think they would probably say the creationists do.
Right, they sure do. But you see, what I do is then I follow up with some clarifying questions. I say, let's say the paleontologist is looking at the fossil record that's available in the present today in the various museums and paleontological digs. And then I'll ask, do the creation scientist and the evolutionary scientist...
Caden Slinker says, I accept both. Accept both. You mean accept ACC? I'm not sure what accept means there. But hey, we got some bingos. Hold on. Let's take a look at who we got for bingos here. There's been earlier ones that I hadn't even noticed. Max P looks like I'm seeing. Oh wait, no, I'm seeing Fearmonger as probably the first bingo to come in. Then Max P, Obstinate Sparrow, Hollyhawk, Caden Slinker, and Max P is back again. So hey, congratulations to all those people who got bingo.
Do they have the same or different evidence to observe in the present? What do you think?
It's different. And the thing is, it's not that there's different evidence available. It's that creationists routinely and purposefully ignore a large portion of it, more than half of it, well more than half of it, some 90% of it. I'm sorry, I'll leave Caden alone. I don't know why. I think here's what it is. I get into like correcting everything mode when I do these shows, and so maybe sometimes that means I'm a stickler on the spelling.
I think they're going to think that it's the evolutionist.
Well, at the same time, it's going to be the same fossils, the same evidence to observe in the present. And when
Yeah, except, look, I've read things like baraminology papers, right? Like, I've sat and read them. Not many, but I've read them. And I know, okay, I have at the time been able to come up with taxa that both could have and should have been included that were not, that are the reasons that you gave, that, or got the answers that you got. So I know that creationists are not including all of the data they could, even when it comes to the fossil record. They simply aren't. And when you see what happens when creationists include more data than typical, you get things like Todd Wood and his publication saying that basically certain hominins that most creationists said were just apes. He came to the conclusion, actually, I think they're humans. There was a big uproar. Like, oh no, I can't accept this. Look at how small his brain is. Yeah, well, guess what? He included more data. Because Todd Wood is that rare person who says, look, evolution has the evidence. They really do. I just think young Earth creationism is true anyway, and I'm going to try and get the evidence for it. He knows okay, I wouldn't say no evidence, because he probably does think that there are things that are evidence. But he knows that there is a huge evidentiary gap, and that evolution is the one with the evidence when it comes down to it. He just thinks he can fix that problem. I think that he's somewhat delusional about that. But, or at least wrong. I don't want to diagnose the guy. I think he's wrong about that. But at least it's the most honest you can reasonably be while being a creationist.
And an astronomer is looking up at a distant galaxy and the light is coming back into his spectrometer and the various kinds of energy waves.
Hey, I thought that wasn't about... I thought we had to reject things about the past because light has a travel time. So, you know, we're looking at the past whenever we look at a distant galaxy. In fact, so far into the past, it's farther into the past than you think the universe has existed for, which raises the problem of, you know, how the light got here, but hey.
Creation scientists and the evolutionary scientists, do they have the same or different evidence to observe in the present?
Same evidence.
It's the same evidence. You see...
No, just take a drink.
It's kind of like those crime shows that are on television. You know, for instance, CSI. You know, so what we have is I
thought you didn't like forensic science, though, buddy.
Have some scientists that are digging up evidence and facts about a crime that happened in the past. What they do is they bring those facts and evidence into the courtroom to be presented to a jury. However,
Fearmonger says Todd Wood took an unusual selection on the triangle for a young Earth creationist speaker. Yeah, see, he found out how to break the triangle meme. Because he's not technically being dishonest. He's also not really very uninformed. But his excuse is to say, I'm just going to be irrational. Which, I mean, okay. I guess that's an option. It kind of breaks the meme a little bit, but hey, you know what? It's just a meme. Renee Reptile Egg Crumble, who's been a member for 9 months, says, happy birthday to Bent. Yes, happy birthday to Bent. Everybody, I don't know if you know this, it is Bent's birthday, and I'm sure that he would love nothing more than a pizza. Which is somewhere around 111%. So, you know, we're getting there. Awesome.
Same facts and same evidence, but there's two opposing attorneys, each giving an interpretation of those facts and evidence.
Actually, attorneys routinely seek to exclude facts that would be relevant to the case that are harmful to their cases. And sometimes they win. And also, attorneys aren't there to get at the truth fundamentally. Now, it is true that some attorneys will not take cases where they think they will have to argue things that they don't think are true. And hey, more power to them. But fundamentally, the job of an attorney is to make their client or their side, if they don't have a client or their client is like the government, is to make sure that their side wins, regardless of the facts. And we can see that all the time. Like, I'm sure that at least some of you can come up with an example of a court case where you know the outcome, and you know what the outcome should have been if the object of the case were to get to the truth. And that's not the object of, or that wasn't the outcome. But that's the thing. That's not what scientists are doing. Science is not here to disprove the Bible. It's not here to show that the Earth is millions of years old. It's not here to come up with an atheistic option for the origin of anything. Science is just here to come up with the best, most repeatable, most well-supported, least falsified, but still falsifiable account of how the world works. That's it. If those things end up being problems for your theology, that's a problem for you and your theology. It's not a problem for science. Anonymous Pie for $20 due says, Pizza Fund, happy birthday, Bent. And Starsong for $5 says, don't blame me if Bent doesn't get it. It's his pizza. I've already donated to the Pizza Fund. Also, I love dinosaur eggs. I mean, look, dinosaur eggs are pretty delicious. I am not going to pretend otherwise. And every once in a while I get someone saying like, Dapper, isn't that cannibalism? Dinosauria is a very large grouping. It's bigger than mammalia. If it's not cannibalism for you to eat beef, it's not cannibalism for me to eat a chicken egg. Sorry. So, here we go.
While one attorney might be saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've seen the facts and evidence. Obviously, you can see my client is innocent. The facts prove it. While the other attorney is saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I don't know what facts he's talking about, because obviously it shows that he's guilty. Then this one's going to go, no, jury, he's misinterpreting the facts. And this one's saying, no, he's misinterpreting the facts.
How many closing statements do you think attorneys get? Because it's not like 4 per case, my guy. What are you talking about?
But in this case, in the creation and evolution debate, most people in our culture have only heard one side of the story.
I mean, I grew up hearing almost entirely the young Earth creationist side of the story. And it didn't even really work when that was all I was hearing. Because it's not internally consistent. So, like, and the other thing is, with the whole, like, both sides, here, this is just like both sidesing, like, flat Earth, right? Why don't we teach the controversy? Because there isn't any controversy. There is as much controversy about evolution as there is about the globe versus the flat Earth. So there's no reason to hear out every single option, right? Because most options are so absurd that there's no point in taking them seriously. And young Earth creationism is in that. For young Earth creationism to be right, we would have to be wrong about basically all of physics, all of chemistry, virtually all of biology. It's hard to find an aspect of science that we would not have to be wrong about, fundamentally, at a very basic level, in order for young Earth creationism to be true. I really mean that, right? You find me a law in science, and I will find you an area where creationism probably violates it. And yet, it's supposed to be something that we're going to take seriously in science classrooms. Until creationism can get an internally coherent model of its own history of the Earth that can actually take into account all of the data, that does not deceptively use techniques inappropriately, and that does a better job of predicting future data than current hypotheses, it has no place being taught in public schools.
And so for Christians, when it comes down to those people that are in their family and those people that are their neighbors or their coworkers who have never heard the idea that the physical evidence supports the historical account of the Bible.
Well, I mean, it generally doesn't.
Who's going to tell them the other side?
I don't know, man. It's the same thing as like, hey, how come all these people haven't heard all the amazing stuff that I'm going to flat smack them with as my flat Earth evangelism? You know what? Most of them have probably never heard that actually, instead of gravity, it's just density and buoyancy, even though that doesn't make sense. Most people have never heard that. Similarly, most people have never heard, hey, even though the actual geology of the Earth absolutely precludes a worldwide flood as the cause of that geology, maybe there was one anyway. Yeah, most people probably haven't heard that, and there's no reason for them to, because it's absurd. It is far more absurd than most of the fairy tales that this guy doesn't like. Like, honestly, an actual fairy tale about fairies is less implausible. Because you know what it is about the current Earth's configuration that makes fairies impossible? Near as I can tell, nothing. But virtually everything about the geology of the Earth absolutely precludes 100% the idea of a global flood. So, yeah, if you want to tell me what's more plausible, an actual story about fairies or the flood of Noah, it's the fairies. And it's not really much of a contest. Oh, no, I forgot. It's electromagnetism, not gravity or buoyancy. Good point, DM Wing. What about Dropity, though? Have we forgotten about Dropity?
So what you're saying is we have the same evidence, but it just
Which is a lie, but okay, I'll take a drink for it.
really boils down to two different interpretations.
Right. And so when many people think that evolution is scientific fact, I'm not saying that it's not science, but those
Hey, you know what? You're doing better than a lot of young Earth creationists are by saying it's science, because it absolutely is, even if it's wrong.
interpretations are not operational science. They're interpretations based on their worldview, the way they see it. And most people never think about this. And that's why we need to understand this differential between these two different kinds of science.
Can you tell me more about how someone's worldview plays into the interpretation, since we all have the same facts?
Is it just me, or does it seem like she has these questions already memorized and like this is rehearsed? Like, I don't know, something about her just seems not very like spontaneous. Like these are actual extemporaneous questions that she has. She kind of feels like she's reading off of a note card. Which, I mean, you know what? Whatever, it's fine, I guess. But it just seems odd. Like she has sort of a robotic delivery for these lines.
It's, again, the worldview is what's going to drive their interpretation. When things in the past, they're not testable, they're not repeatable.
They're absolutely testable. The entire point of history is to test things in the past. Now, we don't always use the exact techniques in history that we would use in, say, science. But that is the point. You can absolutely test things about the past. For instance, if someone tells you a story about the past, you can test it by doing things like saying, hey, does this story actually fit in with what we know about how physics work? And if the story violates the laws of physics, well then guess what? From a scientific standpoint, you have good reason to say that that story is probably not true. There you go. You just tested a story about the past. That's it. Like if I told you that Galileo actually built one of his human-powered flying contraptions, and it actually allowed him to fly from Italy to France, or what is now Italy to what is now France, right? Sure. All you would really need to do to test that story about the past is to go check and see if it's possible for any of his human-powered flight contraptions to actually allow a human to travel from Italy to France. And you know what you're going to find out? You're going to find out the answer is no. So you have tested a story about the past and found it to not be true as a result of your scientific inquiry. The past is absolutely open to examination. The only way to disallow science to test the past is to argue that the uniformity of nature does not apply. But the problem is that once you say that the uniformity of nature can be violated, then science itself becomes impossible, because we have no reason to expect our experimental results to hold true in the future or in different places, right? Because the entire basis of science, the whole reason we can even logically make it work, is based on the fundamental assumption of the invariance of nature, that the laws that the universe runs according to operate the same no matter where you go and no matter what time or day it is. So that when I say, hey, this is a 500 watt light bulb and I'm going to connect it to this battery that has, I don't know, 1,000 joules, I can power this light bulb for 2 seconds. Because that's how all of this works. That's how all the math works out in the physics. And yes, I'm simplifying things. I'm not accounting for things like internal resistance in the battery, the fact that batteries don't just kind of give it full power and then turn off. You know what? I'm simplifying things here, right? But if we ignore the fact that I'm oversimplifying, we have a 1,000 watt battery, or not watt, joules in the battery, and we have a 500 watt light bulb. We can run it for 2 seconds. That's going to be true tomorrow. It would have been true 100 years ago. It would have been true a million years ago. It will be true in a million years. It will be true here. It'll be true in the Andromeda Galaxy. It'll be true on Mars. It'll be true in Australia, Antarctica. It'll be true in China. It'll be true in France. It'll be true in Canada. That's the basics of how science is supposed to work. If you want to get rid of that, okay, but then no test is ever of any meaningfulness at all, ever under any circumstances. Because you've gotten rid of our entire ability to use empiricism. You're just deleting science from existence by changing the philosophical framework under which it operates. Heather Evolution of Fork Spoon for 199 says, you mean Da Vinci, right? What did I say? I did mean Da Vinci, but maybe I said something else. Did I say Leonardo? What did I say? Oh, whatever. I don't remember what I said. But yes, I do mean Da Vinci. Sorry about that.
They're not observable. And so, if they believe evolution is a fact, they're going to interpret all the facts in the present to conform with their paradigm, to conform with their worldview.
But that's the thing, that's not true. Overturning a current paradigm is the surest fire way to get famous and even rich in science. If you could actually find a good reason to say that some new organism actually was unrelated to any other life on Earth, that would be an astounding finding. Oh, I said Galileo? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I definitely did mean Galileo. My bad, I meant Da Vinci. Or Leonardo, because Da Vinci isn't technically part of his name. Aha! But, yeah. Sorry about that. I guess I did say Galileo. I blame the rum.
So they're starting with their worldview and not the facts.
No, they're... I'm gonna take a drink. Nothing in evolutionary biology started out as simply the presupposition that this must be what the conclusion is, so that's what we will go with. In fact, evolution in terms of like even just accepting the Darwinian mechanisms, not all the other mechanisms we've discovered since then, wasn't even really set in stone as like a thing that was we were very confident about until well into the 20th century. People kept rejecting Darwin because they had other ideas. These are all the conclusion of long amounts of experiments with people who were biased against evolution, trying to come up with other options. Now, they might not be options that young Earth creationists would like, but they certainly are not the options that we have now as far as how we know biology to work. The ideas of natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, all of these things, epigenetics, all of these are conclusions that had to be come to against opposition. They weren't simply just accepted as is by a welcoming community of scientists who thought that the philosophical implications of these ideas were great, and so they were just going to accept them. They were all brought in under heavy opposition that eventually was won out against that opposition. So, yeah, no.
Exactly. And one of the most important things, I think, for people to understand is that when they're watching perhaps a program on evolution or looking at a textbook, they're not being given facts.
Take a drink. Yes, they are. When someone says that, hey, this is an animal who was found in North America that lived this long ago, according to this dating technique, those are all facts. They just are. Those are the facts in science are the data, and even data that we get as a result of crunching other data can still be the facts of science. So, you know, the height, weight, length, age, location of objects, the way they interact, the things they did in an experiment or observation, those are the facts of science. You don't have to like them. You don't even have to accept them, but that's what they are.
It's being given an interpretation of facts that, in the case of evolution, is based on a presupposition that has some really big scientific problems.
Hey man, we're almost 13 minutes into this. This is only a 25-minute video. Would you like to give any of them? You know, give something of substance to this entire episode? Because I don't think we have enough time to go do a second part on this episode, and yet you're giving me nothing, my guy.
So, are there any examples of scientific evidence that would support a biblical worldview?
Oh, numerous.
Okay, first of all, there's no such thing as a biblical world. Well, okay, that's not fair. There is no one biblical worldview. You can construct many mutually contradicting worldviews from just the Bible. That's just a plain fact. There is no one biblical worldview. You might think you have the biblical worldview. You don't. You at best have a biblical worldview. And that's because, fundamentally, the Bible is not internally consistent in every single aspect. There are parts of the Bible that contradict other parts of the Bible, and in order to come up with a coherent worldview from the Bible, you are going to have to choose which parts of the Bible to prioritize, which parts to deprioritize, and even which parts to reject and simply ignore. And I'll just give a quick example, right? Christians are generally, nowadays at least, against abortion, because they say that personhood occurs at conception. But in the Bible, it is very clear, at least in the Torah, that personhood does not occur during conception and does not occur at least until birth, because a penalty for killing an unborn child is never the same as the penalty for murder in the Torah. The only exception is if you kill the unborn child and also the pregnant person, in which case, yes, it is the penalty for murder, but it's because you killed the pregnant person. If you had just caused a miscarriage, there would be a financial penalty because you caused property damage. And yet, people will go around saying that being anti-abortion is a key part of a biblical worldview. It only is if you ignore the actual way that the Bible treats unborn children. And I'm not here to argue about abortion. I'm just pointing out that, hey, that's not in the Bible. The Bible is not internally consistent on most things. So you're going to have to pick and choose. There is no such thing as the biblical worldview, or taking things as the Bible tells you, because the Bible does not agree with itself on most ideas.
It's almost too many to count. Absolutely.
So, what are some of the best evidences, or maybe even some of your favorite ones that you use when you're speaking in churches?
Well, Don, one that really makes
Finally, we get to a real point.
a lot of impact on people. And I don't know if you've heard this, but it's mind-blowing. And that is that Dr. Mary Schweitzer.
Oh my God. I'm just going to take a drink, just preemptively. You know, Mary Schweitzer has repeatedly pointed out how much she hates it when people do this, because her work in no way supports young earth creationism, and she's also a Christian. And she hates the way other Christians treat her work. So, anyone who does this is being directly disrespectful to her.
At the time at Montana State University, serving under the great Jack Horner, the one that we were just talking about earlier, the #1 dinosaur paleontologist in the world. And what she discovered was inside dinosaur bones, specifically the femur of a T-Rex, she found red blood cells.
Yep, first thing that he points out, and it's not true. Let's take a drink. Okay, did Mary Schweitzer find red blood cells? The answer is not yes. However, I cannot say that the answer is no. Mary Schweitzer found structures that were morphologically consistent with non-mammal, like reptilian red blood cells. Were they red blood cells? I don't know the answer to that, neither does Mary Schweitzer. She does not have enough evidence to conclude that that's what they were. Yeah. Do I think that they were the remains of red blood cells? I think it's more likely than not. But does that mean I can say that that's what they were? No, because neither I nor Dr. Schweitzer have the evidence for that. Also, I really don't like the fact that most people seem to be talking about Dr. Schweitzer and just calling her Mary Schweitzer. Now, at the time she made this discovery, she didn't have her PhD, but she does now. She's more properly addressed as Dr. Schweitzer or Dr. Mary Schweitzer. Let's not forget the doctor part. And look, I'm guilty of that too, so I get it. But I don't like that I do it, and I don't like that other people. She should be given the respect that she deserves for having earned that PhD.
Now, think about that for a moment. One of the things she said it was totally shocking. I didn't believe it until we'd done it 17 times.
Yeah, no one had ever found anything like that before because no one had ever really thought to check.
But you see, it even got more exciting because they dissolved the bony matrix and they found unfossilized fibrous tissue that was flexible.
No, they didn't. Jeez. All right, let's take a drink. We'll talk about this. So what does fossilization mean? Well, normally people mean to say permineralization, but that's not technically the same thing. Fossils don't have to be permineralized in order to be fossils. Any remains of an organism that are greater than about 10,000 years old or so are fossils, which means that technically there doesn't even have to be a chemical change. If the original bone hydroxyapatite just remains there, that's still technically a fossil. But what actually happened with this tissue? Was it just intact tissue? No, it wasn't even tissue. It was fragments of various proteins that themselves had been preserved by cross-linking, the same mechanism of preservation that allows for formaldehyde to preserve things. Starsong says, can I call her Dr. Mary because I have no clue how to spell her last name? Maybe in text. DM not intended for copyright or plagiarism wing says, but she's just a woman, Dapper, with sarcasm. I mean, to some extent, yeah, people are just people. But people who do the work to actually get a degree deserve to have that record, I think. Now, if you just typically just don't call people by titles, okay, then sure, maybe you have a good reason to not call her doctor. So, was this fossilized? Well, it was certainly chemically altered in a way that allowed it to be preserved for an extensive, essentially indefinite amount of time. It was not intact. There were no intact collagen molecules or any other kind of biomolecules that were found. So, I don't know. Is an animal soaked in formaldehyde, quote-unquote, intact? I would argue no. Is it preserved? Yes. Are those the same thing? No. No, they're not. Was this soft tissue preservation more well-preserved than a formaldehyde-soaked frog? Or less well-preserved? Significantly less well-preserved. So, yeah, this was not something that she cut open a T-Rex femur and it just started pouring out blood and she was able to scoop out the marrow to put it on her toast.
Flexible and resilient could be stretched and returned to its original shape. And she couldn't believe it. And you know what? I don't blame her. Because sometimes our worldview, our faith in what we believe, it's hard to let go. But I think a more apt interpretation of this evidence is that the dinosaur bones are not 65 million years old.
Okay, well that would require us to be wrong about basic physics like gravity, Brownian motion. It would require us to be wrong about things like nuclear physics, like how spontaneous nuclear decay works, how the strong and weak nuclear forces work. It would probably require us to be wrong about chemistry, so we would have to be wrong about how electrons work. It would require us to be wrong about almost everything, basically, right? Especially since if the strong and weak nuclear forces change, those are connected to things like the speed of light, which would also probably mean that we're wrong about the speed of light, which would mean that we're wrong about basically all of relativity. So that's one option, yep. One option is that these bones are young, and therefore everything we know about essentially everything is wrong. Or maybe there's new chemistry we hadn't discovered yet, and we should investigate that. Unsurprisingly, both Dr. Schweitzer, as well as the rest of her team, and basically the entire rest of paleontology, decided that, well, maybe instead of trying to say that everything we know about science is wrong, we should check into the whole new chemistry thing. And then it turns out they did find some chemistry that could plausibly preserve these things, and that fit with what was known about the chemistry of the dinosaur bone, which is in fact iron cross-linking. Now, if you're Matt Powell, you might think, well, this bone wasn't submerged in iron. That's true. But it did have a lot of blood, originally, and blood has a lot of iron. So, there you go.
Because how could that stretchy material last that long?
Cross-linking. It could last that long by cross-linking. So, the reason that cartilage, or not cartilage, sorry, what am I trying to say here? Collagen, that's it. The reason it's itself already a very tough molecule is because it has this triple helical shape where it connects at various points, and therefore it's essentially automatically cross-linked. What iron, or in some cases formaldehyde or other preserving agents, can do is introduce additional loops and cross-links in this that tightly wind the molecule in ways that it wouldn't be in life, but in ways that make it hard for it to degrade. And so what was found was chunks of collagen that could stick together that were cross-linked, but were still broken up because they had in fact decayed. So we didn't get whole collagen molecules, we got chunks of them that retain some of their chemical or physical properties as a result of iron cross-linking. And then when she did other experiments to simulate extensive amounts of time with iron cross-linking, she found that iron cross-linking could allow things to last, as far as she could tell, more or less indefinitely. And there was plenty of iron in the blood because of how well sealed off from the environment the bone was when it was covered. Let's see. Hypesci says, I just talked about Matt Powell saying that a couple hours ago. Yeah, Matt Powell loves to say... The thing with Matt Powell is he likes to repeat a lot of the standard talking points, but it's very clear he doesn't understand them, at all, which is kind of annoying.
Now, you just talked about how we hear that dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago, and millions of years is a concept that we hear a lot about. But where did that idea of millions of years come from?
Well, typically...
I mean, it's geology, but I'm also forgetting that I need to say a special thank you to Carnival Frog. So, over the last couple days, I've received the Call of Cthulhu Investigator's Handbook, as well as a book full of lore on monsters for Call of Cthulhu. They both came from Carnival Frog from my wish list, so thank you very much, Carnival Frog. I think I still have one more thing from you possibly coming. In which case, if it is from you, I will thank you separately, because I don't have it yet, so I can't be sure it's from you. So there we go.
We find that mostly in the late 1700s and really the early 1800s, more or less new science called geology was interpreting those sedimentary layers to have taken millions of years. They would.
Okay, I'm going to take a drink here. It's not just that it's an interpretation. It's that people were taking careful observation of how fast sedimentation could possibly occur, and noting that given that amount of sedimentation that was evident on Earth, that there were a minimum amount of time that would take. And they weren't just assuming that it wasn't a flood. They were checking. They were saying, okay, what kind of sedimentation does a flood leave behind? Well, it's not this kind of sedimentation. Where can we find this kind of sedimentation happening? And then looking and seeing, okay, well, how fast can that occur? And saying, okay, well, since this isn't flood sediment, we can't use flood times for it. So we have to use times that we can gather from actual sedimentation. So Carnival Frog says, you're welcome, enjoy, back to lurking. Thank you very much, Carnival Frog. I wasn't even sure you were here. Let's see. Heather Evolution of Forkscrew says, so you have seen the Matt Powell video Vice Rhino was responding to. Yes, I have. Yep. I do check his channel every once in a while. That video might actually end up being what we talk about on Matt with Maddie. Which is a little weird because Vice Rhino was covering it. But one of the things is I noticed that I pick out different things than other debunkers do when I cover the same thing. So I do think there's some value in having more than one debunker take a look at the same nonsense, because I will pick out different things to highlight than Vice Rhino did. In fact, as I was watching his videos about it, I was noticing, I'm like, hey, he's making good points, but they're not always the same points I would make. So it might still be worthwhile for me to go over it. But then again, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'll probably have to talk to Maddie about it. So
look and see how these layers were laid down very slowly in the present, and they would postulate that if it happens slowly now, then it always happened slowly in the past.
It's not just that it always happens slowly in the past because it happens slowly now. There are certain things that you can't just accelerate, right? Like, I can't tell 9 pregnant people to produce 1 baby in 1 month. It's not going to work. It's not how babies work. Now, you could say, but you can get to an average of 1 baby per month if you just have 9 pregnant people at different stages of pregnancy. Okay, cool, great. But I can't get together 9 people, get them all pregnant, not necessarily me personally, but have them all become pregnant, and then get a baby a month later. And then have them all not be pregnant as a result. Some things just take a certain amount of time because it's physically impossible to accelerate them past a certain point. Now, that's true for a lot of things, like limestone deposition. Limestone deposition happens the fastest in calm, I believe slightly acidic, warm water. And there's a maximum rate of about 2-ish centimeters per 1,000 years that limestone can deposit at. That's it. Now, you can get a little landslide or slump in the limestone that causes some deposition to flow downhill, and therefore you get a slightly thicker than you were thinking deposition in one place. But overall, the average thickness can't increase much more than about 2 centimeter, well, we'll say about a centimeter every 500 years or so. That's it. Attempts to dump more lime in won't do anything because it won't settle out fast enough. Because now you have a high energy situation where the tiny little particles are going to be held aloft by, as previously mentioned, Brownian motion. It is physically impossible to get things like that to deposit faster. There is a limit. And so it's not just we kind of just assumed that it was uniformitarian. No, we tested to see if we could make it happen faster, and we couldn't. And creationists, you guys are welcome to build yourself a sedimentation tank and do your own sedimentation experiments to show how we can get fine-grained, non-flocculated sediments to deposit at catastrophic speeds. I look forward to it, but they never do. And so until they do, I'm going to go with all of the experiments that say it's impossible, physically impossible. It's not a presupposition. It is a firm conclusion of physics.
However, there are better explanations in geology that would explain that. For example, we have what's called polystrate fossils.
Oh, just drink.
Poly meaning many, and strate or strata would be those sedimentary layers. So a polystrate fossil is usually a tree that's been fossilized and turned to stone.
It's interesting that it's usually a tree. You know, the things that can stand upright for the longest period of time. If this were actually the result of a catastrophic flood, shouldn't we see all sorts of polystrate fossils? I would think so. But it's we don't. And yeah, it's weird. Weird that it's always trees.
In many cases goes through millions of years of layers.
In no cases does it do that. Okay, so these quote-unquote polystrate trees are actually going through different laminae most of the time because they're embedded in a single formation. They're not actually going through different strata. In fact, they're usually embedded in a single member of that formation. So what's actually happening? Well, these are almost all from the same type of environment. Lowland, marshy mires, right? So foresty, swampy areas. And you know what's common in that kind of place where you have lots of slow-moving water and wetlands? Occasional floods. Occasional floods will come through and dump a bunch of sediment on top, which is what we see. So we see these trees laying down roots, or in the cases of a lot of carboniferous ones, rhizomes, because they're not technically the same kind of trees that we have now. And so we get them sending down these root systems, which means they're being fossilized where they grew. Then we're getting a paleosol layer, which means a fossilized bit of soil. Soil itself takes years to establish because soil isn't just a bunch of sediment. It is organisms, it's bioturbation, roots from plants. All of this stuff has to go into it. And then we get another layer of things like, turbidites with graded bedding and things that seem like a flood deposit. Then we get another paleosol. And other plants put down roots, and other trees grow at that new higher location. And the previous tree was probably still alive at this point. It probably survived through several of these flooding events, because you might not know this, but trees can survive mild flooding, especially if they're already very water-tolerant trees, like these were, because these are all swampy environments. And so we have these successive layers of paleosols and trees growing at different layers, all in situ, which means that this represents, at the very least, centuries, maybe millennia, but not millions of years, because it doesn't take that long to accumulate flood in swamps, and because swamps are somewhat temporary on the scale of geological time. So that's what's actually happening. And the reason we can tell that it's not catastrophic is specifically that they grow in situ and that we have the paleosols. You cannot get numerous paleosol layers as well as trees growing at different heights in situ at those different paleosol boundaries unless it takes at least decades. So the explanation for these has never been that there's millions of years. And the creationist explanation of it all happening with 1 year is also impossible. That's why that's not what science says is going on here. So his straw man is absurd, granted, but so's his answer, and the real answer isn't any of the things he's talked about.
Now, Don, think about this. Will a tree sit there for millions of years to be slowly buried? Does that make
No, but it will sit there for decades, especially in an environment where lignin-decomposing bacteria and fungi have not evolved, which is the environment that these are found in.
any sense?
No, they rot.
Yeah, it's going to decompose.
Again, less so in the world then, but yeah, this is a straw man. That's never been the contention. I'm going to take a drink. So, yeah.
Again, a better interpretation of those facts is that that tree was buried in a cataclysmic event where those layers were laid down quickly.
But not so quickly as to prevent paleosols from developing, which means it couldn't have been in a year. So I will grant you that there is evidence of somewhat catastrophic deposition in these areas, but it could not have all been as part of a single event, because we have the layers of paleosol, and we know that soil takes years to establish. So, sorry, buddy, but your idea is directly contradicted by the evidence. And the thing is, remember how he was talking about how we have the same evidence? I'm bringing to you evidence that he's not bothering to mention. He is demonstrating right now that creationists just ignore evidence, because I have yet to hear a creationist even mention the fact that we have paleosol horizons in these deposits. But that's an important aspect of this. You cannot ignore them and come up with a plausible explanation for these fossils. And yet, I'm the one bringing them up, the so-called evolutionist, whereas he, the creationist, is ignoring that data. So he is right now giving us a very good example of what I was talking about and what he was accusing creationists of. He's projecting.
And the Bible gives us an idea of that, the worldwide flood.
Also, here's a fun thing. There is evidence of flooding in these, but flooding doesn't have to be worldwide. I don't know if you guys know this, but there are floods today that aren't worldwide, and they leave behind flood deposits.
And on top of that, some of these sedimentary layers actually end up being bent. So we have rock layers around the world where they will go up at an angle and even sometimes turn back on themselves.
Okay, so he's just going to say that rock is brittle, therefore this can't happen. And we're going to wrap up after I give this explanation. So, Baba Ali says, what is a horizon in this context? So a horizon is basically where you have this continuous action of soil building, and then it just cuts off at a certain point. And that is the horizon. It's where that continuous activity just ends and you can't see any more of it. So that's what it means in this context. I would probably have to get you a more technical definition from like a geologist if you wanted a more in-depth explanation. But that is a good enough way to think about it that you probably won't come away confused if you think about it as just like that's where it cuts off. End of that action that we can see. So the idea. Oh, Josh Verghese just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much. That brings us to 75%, which is unfortunately not 111%. So sorry, birthday boy, probably not getting pizza. But I will take 5 drinks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so rock is generally brittle. However, if confining pressure is high enough and temperature is high enough, we have known now for over 100 years experimentally that even the most brittle rock will plastically deform. In fact, you can even do this with something that's even more brittle than most rock. Things like dried plaster of Paris. If you put plaster of Paris under enough pressure and you heat it up a bit, you can get it to cause plastic deformation. It's just a fact that we have known experimentally via good, what do you call it? Operational science, that's what they call it. Also, Eric Hamian just gave a $20 super chat with no message, so thank you very much. How much do we need for pizza? Let's see. Well, we need to get it to about just over 111%. So we would need 31% more on top of what we're getting now. So, So let's see. Where were we? Oh, right. Now, another thing is, if these layers were bent when they were still unlithified, therefore soft, then doing that would cause the grains as well as the cementing agent to cross the layer boundaries in these strata, which means that they would transition more smoothly rather than being in distinct layers like we can see here. They're not, which means that they did not form when they were soft. And further, the fact that there are in fact stress fractures, which you can see all over this picture, indicates that yes, the rocks were in fact solid, because you also can't get brittle fracture failures in unlithified rock, because it can't brittle fracture, because it's not brittle yet. So yes, we have known experimentally for over a century that this is perfectly explicable by things like confining pressure and high temperatures. And we know that this had to have happened when it was hardened and lithified, because we don't have smearing between the layers, and we have stretch fractures. So this is no evidence at all. Now, John Hopkins also gifted $20 with no there was a message for the pizza fund. Thank you very much. Let's add that in. So that's 6% there. So I guess you can do that math. So let's take a look at what is coming up here on the channel, and we will start wrapping up after that. After we do get off the air, I am planning to watch the final 2 episodes of Power Rangers Mystic Force over on the Discord if you have access to the Discord and that interests you. We're not going to do the next 2 episodes of Power Rangers RPM, and that is at the request of Bent. He's only up for 2 episodes today, so it's his birthday. He gets to decide. So, coming up on Tuesday is the next Kent with Bent. This one is going to be called Brain Activity Absent. That should be at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So there you go. That will be that. Then on Thursday, let's see what we got here. We will be putting in it's just a clown show. Evolution is a Fact, part 4 of 5. So that is the Sabor Ahmed and Muslim Lantern series is continuing on. And it gets really, really dumb. Yeah, so that is on a Thursday. That will be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. If you live outside of the Pacific or Eastern time zones, I guess just, I don't know, do math. Sorry, I'm not going to come up with times for everything. Then on Saturday, so I don't think we're going to continue this video. We might. So I had to figure that out, right? Because if we continue it, we probably can't squeeze the whole 2 hours out. But then again, maybe we can. I don't think Vishanti will be here next week either, so it'll probably just be me. So yeah, I'm not sure what we'll be responding to, but we will be having something for Saturday. And that will also be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Josh McGee says, Dapper, Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith was wondering what 31% is in USD. Oh, so I don't honestly remember. So let me do some math. Let's see. 1% is, I believe, $3.65. I think is the answer to that. I think. I'm trying to do the math in my head. All right, so yeah, that sums up what we've got coming up in the next week or so. And then, of course, you know, the next Thursday, we do have the finale for the Evolution is a Fact. So that's going to be VHS Pseudoscience, where I'm basing the aesthetic on the VHS horror anthology franchise, which I quite like. So there you go. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your weekend. Stay safe out there. And remember, if you played along with any kind of intoxicating substance, please do not drink, do not drive, do not operate heavy machinery, don't text your ex. The Dapper Dinosaur channel accepts neither liability nor responsibility for any of the harm that you cause to anyone, including yourself, as a result of intoxicating substances. With that, everybody, we got close, but we didn't quite get there for pizza, but that's all right, because you guys are extremely generous, and you are awesome. And also, Ben Tobin already got some cool birthday gifts, so I know he's not hurting too much. Oh, Mark Agamotto for $10 says, for pizza. I don't think it's quite going to get us there. But then again, hey, if it gets us there during the end credits, then it will still count. So I am going to turn it over to the end credits, and I will see all of you guys on Tuesday. And if you want, hey, head over to the Discord. We're going to watch some Power Rangers. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Ella Runteller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostock Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Wallace, John Ackerman, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.